last week of the Scottish Independence Convention's new campaign, Voices for Scotland, we have Dave Thompson here from the SIC to tell us a wee bit more about their work. So over to Dave.
Wel, maat yn fach arsyn, sbysio Davey McHomish, vo Gwen Erson Alaba. Good morning, friends. I'm David Thompson, or McTavish, for Voices for Scotland. Good morning, friends, for those who don't have the two proper languages of Scotland. I'm Dave Thompson from Voices for Scotland. So we have many voices in Scotland, not just the languages, but the voices of individual people, of regions, of areas. We're hugely diverse. Voices for Scotland is a limited company set up by the Scottish Independence Convention as an arm's length campaigning, researching and fundraising company. We're non-party, we're a civic coalition of indie organisations, an umbrella coalition, if you like, created by the SIC and consisting of over 20 individual organisations, including the SNP, the Green Party, the Scottish Socialist Party. But not just that. We have Women for Independence as members, we have Commonweal, we've got Radical Independence, Business for Scotland, Christians for Independence, and a variety of other pro-independence yes groups. We also have regional yes groups. Yes Highland is a member of the convention. Yeah, there's some of them here, look, yeah. I'm surprised they're up so early on a Sunday morning. And we have Edinburgh and Lothian, and we have Fife, yes people, and there's some more, look, aye. In the northeast, there's Aberdeen and the Northeast Independence Group as well. And we would encourage any of you who are involved in local yes groups who haven't formed some kind of regional get-together to do that and apply to join and be part of this great movement of ours. Now, as I said, we are the campaigning and research arm of the Independence Convention. And what we plan to do is complement and support everyone, all of us who are wanting Scottish independence. We'll work with everybody. And we will not duplicate. We'll be looking to see what others are doing, and we've no intention of duplicating what other arms of our huge resource is actually doing. We'll listen to you. We'll listen to the grassroots folk and say, what do you want us to provide? And we'll try to help you in providing materials and so on, and we'll be doing research as well to see what we can do there. So we want to support the grassroots and provide resources and materials. Now, this has been a momentous week. I think you would all agree. There was the First Minister, Nicola's statement earlier in the week, then the launch of the Yes.Scot campaign, and then the loss of the national newspapers campaign, where they're going to provide videos to assist us, pro-independence videos, and also a rebuttal service. And then, of course, Voices for Scotland, we launched on Thursday. We have a board of 9 people, 4 from out with the convention altogether. I really do believe that this is the start of the home run for Scottish independence. And we are raring to go. We'll now get out there and we'll listen. And we'll particularly listen to those who are not quite sure yet about independence. Those who voted no reluctantly the last time. We'll engage with that 10 or 15% who we believe are crucial to get over the line towards yes, to win the next referendum with 60% or more in favour of yes. We'll listen to the hopes, the fears, and to the aspirations of these folk. We're not particularly wanting to convert any of you because that would put you away from us. So we won't be targeting the message to you. We'll engage positively, optimistically, respectfully. We will gently woo them over to yes. The not quite sures are not our enemies. They're our friends and family. They're our neighbours. They're our colleagues. They actually are our future. So come with us on this great journey which is coming near to its finale. In the next year or so, we will be there. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Dave. That was a good start to the morning, and a formal welcome back, delegates. It's great to see so many of you in here again, looking bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. We've got another day of great discussion and debate to look forward to, but just before we kick off, can I let you know about a wee printing error to the timings for this afternoon? They are, as previously published, 2 p.m. resolutions, 2:45 topical and emergency resolutions, and then at 3:15 we will have the address from Nicola Sturgeon MSP, our party leader and First Minister. So lots to look forward to, but before we get there, we have a number of resolutions to start the morning. So we'll start with resolution number 9, roadmap to nuclear disarmament, to be proposed by Jean Anderson and seconded by Ron Dixon.
Good morning, Conference, and thanks very much for the chance to put this important resolution to you. This party has a long and honourable record of opposition to nuclear weapons. These weapons and climate change are the two big threats to the survival of our planet. Currently, disarmament is going backwards, not forwards. But an independent Scotland will make a truly significant contribution to nuclear de-acceleration. We need a very clear and definite roadmap to make this happen. We need to have practical steps written down and agreed, because this isn't a subject for vague aspiration. And this motion is not just a reiteration of our policy of disarmament. This is a call to action. But what action are we asking of you? What this resolution calls for is for work to be done to spell out the details of all the processes required, the technical and the social as well as the political. The work needs to be coordinated and funded. Experts from the various areas will willingly work together, but they need leadership. What we're asking for here today is that you approve this resolution so we can get the work started now. We're not starting from a blank page. There's a United Nations Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons to support us. It has provisions for countries like ours which have another state's weapons on our territory and want them removed. The political process is spelt out in the treaty, and a timetable is even given. But there's been work on the technical aspects too, and a timetable to do this already exists. In 2012, Scottish CND and Scotland's for Peace together published the Disarming Trident report. It was peer-reviewed work done by the late John Ainslie, coordinator of Scottish CND. And in October 2012, the House of Commons Scottish Affairs Committee published a report which acknowledged that Scottish independence could lead to nuclear disarmament for the whole of Britain. They also said the timetable in Disarming Trident report is realistic. The committee was a cross-party committee, and they took expert advice. So don't let anyone say that we're being over-optimistic or underestimating the time or the difficulty needed to get rid of these bombs. Westminster has agreed. Oh, if only. The first step would be calling in the boat that's out at sea, then disabling the nuclear warheads and the missiles that the submarines contain. It will then take a few years to gradually transfer the over 200 warheads at Coulport to whatever facility the rest of the UK chooses. And it'll take several years after that to repurpose the bases. The details of each of these phases has to be worked out and costed. If you'd like to know more about the technical and practical processes, do visit the SNP CND stall in the exhibition. We've got copies of the Disarming Trident report there for free. The dismantling work, of course, will be done by the highest skilled workers, and it will guarantee them employment for probably about 4 years, while the jobs diversification process takes place at the same time. The work repurposing the bases for their future use as conventional defence bases will create jobs at every skill level, and they will be jobs that will last for years. The money that we won't be spending on Trident will fund plenty of job creation. And thank you. And guess what? The framework for that exists too. We already have a document setting out the bones of what we need to do in this practical exercise. To sum up, we know Scotland can make a major humanitarian contribution to the world, and we need to plan for it. Independence is coming, and coming soon. I've never been more confident of that. We want to be ready from day one. Please support the motion.
Thank you, Jean. We now have Ron Dixon to second the resolution, and if I can ask Chris McEleny to make his way to the platform.
Good morning, Conference. We as a party have reason to be proud, not just of our many achievements, but of our vision of an independent Scotland as international, outward-looking, progressive, caring, inclusive, and welcoming. Conference, nuclear weapons have no place in that vision. They undermine our aspirations, our national identity, not to mention jeopardise the safety of our people and our precious environment. Immediately after Scotland votes yes to independence, our representatives will meet the UK government. One of their key objectives of those discussions will be to secure continued operation of the nuclear bases on the Clyde, the so-called Guantanamo option. We can expect inducements, pressure, intimidation. At that moment, we must have courage. We must have commitment to our vision, and we must have a plan, a roadmap for removal of these weapons of mass destruction permanently from Scotland. We know that Trident is not about defending the UK. It is, and always was, about preserving the global status of a diminishing power. It is about a permanent seat on the UN Security Council. Trident presents a real danger to Scotland. Faslane and Coalport have dreadful safety records, and the warhead convoys are a clear target for terror attack, as are the bases. Any major incident could result in disastrous casualties and contamination of central Scotland. The UK likes to present having nuclear weapons as normal. Of the roughly 200 countries in the world, only 9 have nuclear weapons. Of 193 member states in the UN, 122 voted to ban nuclear weapons. The UN Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons is likely to pass into international law by 2021. Following independence, Scotland can proudly sign the treaty. It prohibits support of any kind, deployment, storage, transport, services to nuclear weapons. It will help international leverage in case of resistance from London. Despite one of these submarines having enough destructive power to literally jeopardize continued life on Earth, they provide little defense of Scotland. Our coastline is longer than India's, with no surface warships based in Scotland to defend it. Our resolution calls for removal of the Royal Navy's nuclear-armed and nuclear-powered submarine fleets from Scotland, including the rotting hulks at Rosyth. But, Conference, we must be able to defend our coastline. our oil and gas facilities, our fishing grounds, our offshore wind farms. We need to convert the Faslane and Coalport bases to house Scotland's Navy. This will not just preserve jobs, we will grow high-value jobs in engineering, in the military, and these will be senior jobs and new capabilities coming to Scotland from this repurposing of these bases, headquartered here in Scotland. Conference, please support this resolution. Thank you.
Thank you, Ron. And now to propose the amendment, we'll have Christopher McEleny to be followed by Jonathan McCall.
Thanks, Convener. Good morning. We're actually absolutely content with the motion. The amendment was actually submitted before there was a slight change in the text of the motion, so we're absolutely happy with the motion. So instead of deleting paragraph 3, we would be happy to just add on our amendment as an addition of the movers of the motion. We're happy to compensate them so we can all support those together. So if that's actually allowed under standing orders, Convener, yep, so we're happy to do that. So, I mean, I worked at Coalport for 12 years and I worked for the Ministry of Defence, and I thought I better be careful coming up to speak because I've obviously signed the Official Secrets Act, but as far as I'm aware now, UK government ministers are allowed to leak national... yeah, So yeah, I'll meet you outside later on to tell you a few state secrets. But I think what's the only point I really want to make is that decades from now, I think people underestimate the position we're currently in. If we manage to rid Scotland of nuclear weapons, I just don't foresee any situation that the UK can house them somewhere else. So by getting rid of nuclear weapons in Scotland, I think we absolutely will make the United Kingdom a nuclear-free state. And if the UK becomes a nuclear-free state, in NATO, you're only left with France then being a human shield for the United States. And I think if we live in a world that only Russia and the United States have nuclear weapons, I think mankind and people across the world will just not accept that. And I think that one day that Scotland can actually be the force for good that creates a nuclear-free world. And I think the message coming from this conference should be, if you want to rid Scotland and you want to rid the world of nuclear weapons, the best way to do that is to vote for an independent Scotland. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. And to speak in favour of the amendment, Councillor Jonathan McCall.
Thanks very much, Chair. And can I just thank you, Chair, and thank the mover of the motion and Chris for agreeing to add this on at the end. Hopefully this is a resolution now with that little addition that we can agree unanimously, Conference. As Chris said, the wording was changed from the draft agenda. And again, can I thank the mover of the motion for doing that when concerns were raised. You know, the BBC and others criticised us yesterday for a little change we decided to make in what they thought we were going to do. Well, I'm sorry, Conference. One of the strengths of this party is that our leadership supports the grassroots to develop and set the direction of this party, and that we all listen to each other and take on board each other's views, and that's what's happened today. So thank you to everyone for that. You know, it's long been SNP policy that Her Majesty's Naval Base Clyde would become, you know, actually not just a naval base, but a conventional forces base in Scotland. And that's even more important now than perhaps previously, with successive Westminster governments underfunding and closing our conventional bases in Scotland. We're going to need places like Faslane and Coalport for our conventional armed forces going forward. The roadmap is very important, and I thought the move of the motion was incredibly eloquent in setting out the reasons for that. But it's very important that we recognise and let the workers of Faslane know and Coalport know that we value the huge diversity and the huge skill set that they have, and that we will support them. They are our workforce of the future and our conventional forces, and we will work to make sure that we make the best of them so that they can contribute to an independent Scotland. I'll just finish by saying that, you know, it's vital. It will come of no surprise to anybody in this room that the SNP and Yes organisations are political movements. And as such, we require to get the support of the people for what we want to do for the benefit of Scotland. And in order to do that, not only must we have the roadmap for denuclearisation, but we must also be able to reiterate this party's commitment to the long-term future for the naval base and our conventional forces, and we must also let those workers who be worrying about their livelihoods know that we value their skills, and we're not, as Labour would have them suggest, we're not about to casually throw that on the scrap heap. So, Conference, I just beg you to support the resolution with that addition on the end. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jonathan. If we can now have Councillor Michelle Campbell to speak for the motion, followed by Jeff Thompson to speak for the amendment.
Anyone know any party games?
Well done, Michelle.
Good morning. I think, does that count towards my Daily Mail? Yeah. Okay, that's fine. Okay, good morning, Conference. I am the co-convener of the Scottish Council's Committee on Radioactive Substances, which you would think that the meetings can be a bit dull and laborious, which they can be, because obviously it's not a devolved issue. You think radioactive substances, that's not what we're talking about, but they obviously do sit along the same plane as nuclear, and a lot of the conversations and the meetings that I go to do involve that conversation. I was really glad to see this motion come to our conference. My perspective that I want to bring is I want to get rid of the scaremongering that we're going to have from our opposition on this, saying, what about the jobs for those individuals and those communities that will be affected by this? No, those jobs are still going to be required, because it doesn't change the fact that we're dealing with the science. They have a half-life. Just because we're going to become nuclear-free, we need to keep our communities and the public safe. We're going to need those skill sets there in years to come, because we have had this inflicted on our nation, but we will keep our communities safe. And that's what I just wanted to bring to the conversation. So when you're out there and engaging with those communities, please make sure that's what you're saying. That is not the truth of the matter, and I welcome the amendment as well, because that is going to secure jobs, and we're going to be trailblazing the way to do it without nuclear in our communities. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. We'll now hear from Jeff Thompson to speak for the amendment. Jeff is a first-time speaker, to be followed by Patrick Grady to speak for the amendment.
Good morning, Conference. Just point out this lovely picture up here. Helensburgh, RAF Helensburgh is the area where the boats are actually moored. Faz Lane is up round the corner. I'm ex-Royal Air Force. I've spent 20 years in the Air Force and the Reserve Forces. I flew Nimrod aircraft out of Kinloss. I'm an English Scot. I'm a European. I'm a Scottish European. I really wanted to back this amendment in particular, because obviously this is my hometown. I'm in the Helensburgh branch. I am English, but my wife, before she died, she was a Scottish proud member of the SNP. I was a 1 on Angus's scale, and I came across to an 11 on Angus's scale. So I'm on your side, okay? Faz Lane is very, very important to Helensburgh and the communities that are around that area. It is a very important base. Faz Lane will be important in the future, because, as we've heard from other speakers, we will need a Scottish Navy. We will get a lot of our income from the areas around Scotland's coastline, and we will need to police that, we will need to protect that. And so therefore we need a conventional naval base on the west coast to look after the west coast side, and I would hope that Forsyth would cover the east coast side of Scotland as well. So we need a naval base, and we need to actually keep it credible. Faslane would provide the infrastructure for that naval base and would give us the ability to go straight into operating out of a fully structured base. But we don't need a massive navy. We don't have world domination credentials. What we want is to police our own area, look after our own backyard, and actually protect our own waters. And for that, we need a modest navy. We don't need the whole of Faslane for that. And so therefore, maybe just the basin that they use at the moment for the nuclear submarines would be sufficient for the few ships that we would need to actually base on the west coast. I would hope that those ships would actually be at sea most of the time rather than tied up, as the Royal Navy does down at Portsmouth. And we need to actually keep those people there employed. That brings me on to the diversification study part of the amendment, which is very important. We've got a very good skill base at Faslane. We need to keep that skill base. The personnel there, they have their families, they are in the community, they're a very important part of the community. They may not vote SNP, but we are the Scottish National Party. We look after all of the people in Scotland, not just the people that are in the SNP.
Jeff, that's your time.
We have to show that we actually care about all of the people at Faslane, even though we don't like the job that some of them have to do at the moment.
Jeff, that's your time.
And so therefore, it's very important that we actually give them hope, okay, and that we actually show them that we are here to support them. I would ask you to accept the amendment.
Thank you, Jeff. And our final speaker, Patrick Grady MP, to speak for the resolution.
Thank you, Kirsten. A few weeks ago, there was a debate in the House of Commons to mark the 50th anniversary of the continuous at-sea deterrent, as if this was something that ought to be celebrated. So even though it was just a technical motion that this House has considered, the SNP pressed that motion to a vote, and all of your SNP MPs voted against the presence of Trident nuclear weapons. It is not something to celebrate. And unlike the Labour Party leader, who is a CND member and abstained, the SNP leader, who is a CND member, was absolutely certain that our MPs were doing the right thing. We have a long and proud tradition of SNP members joining the CND very often before they actually come to the party. And I just want to pay tribute to the likes of Jean Anderson, who moved today's motion, to John Ainsley, the late John Ainsley, who was a constituent of mine, and also to Brian Quayle, who is with us today, who still is a constituent into his 80th year of campaigning against weapons of mass destruction. And what is exciting about this motion, I think, conference, is that it sets out a practical roadmap for how we actually build a nuclear-free Scotland and a nuclear-free world, because we know now it is going to be a reality. First of all, this is quite a good job, I think, for the new policy committees that are being set up, and everyone standing for them today should make this a priority for those committees. But it also means it will be a priority now for the independence prospectus we'll be putting forward, and then for the independent government that we know is now within our grasp. So please support the motion.
Thank you, Patrick. So delegates will now move to the summing up of the debate. Can I ask Chris McEleny, do you wish to sum up for the amendment? No, he's waiving his right to do that. And can I ask Jean Anderson if you would like to sum up?
I'm absolutely delighted to sum up such a wealth of good feeling and common sense and coming together. Thank everybody, for the people of the amendment, the people who accepted our motion and spoken in favour of it. It's been an absolute joy to hear. So thank you is my summing up. And we will be taking this forward. SNP CND will be organising an event fairly soon. We'll let everyone know about it. And we hope to work with the policy development committees very closely in the near future. Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Jean. So delegates will now move to voting, and we'll first of all vote on the amendment. So if I can ask all those in favour of the amendment to please raise your cards. Cards down. All those against the amendment to please raise your cards. The amendment is passed unanimously. Thank you, delegates. And if I can now ask you to vote on the resolution with the addition of the amendment, as conference has indicated, if you can please raise your cards if you're in favour. Thank you, delegates. Cards down. And if you can now raise your cards if you are against. And that is passed unanimously. Thank you, conference. Conference, we now move to resolution number 10, a Citizens' Assembly, to be proposed by Joanna Cherry MP and seconded by Chris Hanlon. Joanna.
Thank you, thanks. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thanks. Thank you, everyone. I'm really touched by that welcome, but I hope, convener, it's not going to eat into my time. It's not often you get to come to the conference podium to propose what you thought was an innovative idea, secure in the knowledge that the First Minister has already adopted it. And it's a really great feeling, and I'd like to thank Nicola for doing that last week when she made her momentous and very exciting announcement. When Chris Hanlon and I got together to propose this motion earlier this year, we thought we might have a bit of a struggle to get it onto the conference agenda, but we succeeded because so many delegates gave it their support, and I'd like to thank you for that as well. Part of the reason we also succeeded was that we got the support of two branches in Edinburgh very dear to my heart. First of all, my own branch, Edinburgh Central SNP, and secondly, Sighthill Stenhouse SNP, which are one of the most active branches in my constituency. And I owe all the activists in those branches a great debt of gratitude for supporting this idea. And also to Chris Hanlon for making it happen. And to Leslie Riddick, who's written about it extensively, and Oliver Escobar from Edinburgh University, who is an expert in this area, and Willie Russell from the Electoral Commission, and some of you may have heard them speak about it at the Fringe meeting this morning. Conference, shaping the road ahead to independence is too important a task to be left just to politicians. What we need to do is bring the views of all Scots together and create a shared vision for our future, and that's what the Citizens' Assembly is about. We've seen what happened with the Tories' Brexit vote. The campaign period was short. There was a lack of proper debate beforehand. No one really knew what was being proposed, and the whole of the United Kingdom has been left very divided by it. Now, we also know that the 2014 independence referendum was very different because the tone and the depth of the debate were different. But we need to go even further this time round, and we need to lay a foundation for a shared vision of Scotland, and one that can represent views from people across our nation. Now, citizens' assemblies have been set up in other countries from Canada to Ireland at times of constitutional change, and they've advised on complicated, thorny and difficult issues and helped to find a consensus on the issues on which people are divided. It's important to understand that they're not an alternative to an independence referendum, nor are they an alternative to the democratically elected Parliament, but a process which feeds into policy making through the Parliament and so has a democratic underpinning. And if you want to know more about it, I would suggest that you go online and Google the Irish Citizens' Assembly. I'm a bit biased because I'm half Irish, and my mum always says she tried to hard not to bring me or my sister up to be rampant Irish nationalists, and we've ended up as rampant Scottish nationalists instead. But still, I can tell you there's still a good bit of Irish nationalism in there as well, and I think Ireland has been a shining example for Scotland recently of what equality in a union really means, equality in the EU as opposed to inequality in the UK. But Ireland is also a shining example of a citizens' assembly that tackled a very thorny and divisive issue and came up with a set of recommendations that led to a referendum that led to the issue being resolved, and that was on the issue of abortion in Ireland. And if a citizens' assembly can bring people together over an issue as fraught as the abortion issue was in the Republic of Ireland, then it can do so in Scotland as we prepare our vision of what an independent Scotland should look like. Now, just to put this briefly, the Assembly will not be made up of a bunch of activists like us. I'm afraid you won't necessarily get to go on it no matter how much you want to. It will be selected randomly as representative of the Scottish population, people living in Scotland, by an expert company that will have to answer a competitive tender put out by the Scottish Government to select a random cross-section of citizens. Then it will be chaired by an independent chair. But people like us who feel passionately about the issues will be able to make submissions to the Assembly in writing, and experts can be called to give it evidence. When it makes its report and its recommendations, it will do so to the Scottish Parliament. And of course, we know there is a majority in the Scottish Parliament in favour not just of independence, but also in favour of the idea of a citizens' assembly. Because when Nicola proposed it last week, Alison Johnston from the Greens got up and enthusiastically endorsed the idea. So there will be the democratic underpinning for this assembly. As to the issues it will tackle, that will be for my colleagues such as Jean in the Scottish Parliament. But random selection will be a defence against vested interests. Now, I'm not going to say much more because I suspect I'm running out of time, but what I will say is...
Joanna?
Sorry?
You're out of time, Joanna.
No. Sorry, I'm so deaf, I suspect she's saying my time's up. But I'll just say quickly, lots of people say we must engage everyone. This is a concrete proposal about how to engage everyone. Please give it your support. Thank you.
Thank you, Joanna. We now have Chris Hanlon to second the resolution, and if I can ask Craig Lundy to make his way to the platform.
So I'd like to start by cautioning you that what I'm about to say might sound a bit Pollyanna, but to reassure you that it's based on reasoned analysis of what I know is going on in the background about certain groups of Business for Scotland, Bill Dale, Bill Mills, and what I know of the process in Ireland. And I know I don't have to sell you on this because the First Minister has very generously done the job for me. So I'll try to give you an idea of where I think this is going over the next few months. With the cooperation of the Greens, and maybe even a few other MSPs that will let their democratic tendencies get the better of them, the Scottish Parliament can draw on the experience built up in Ireland and best practice from the rest of the world to empanel an assembly before the summer recess. All the while, the rhetoric coming from our opponents will become increasingly fevered and desperate because they'll have Googled citizens' assemblies and they'll have realised that the writing is on the wall. Because once that assembly begins to meet, they will know as well as we do that they are going to decide that a new referendum is necessary in these circumstances, and then they are going to start to construct that vision of what sort of Scotland that referendum should propose. They'll almost certainly decide that we'll need a written constitution, and if the Scottish Parliament has empowered them to do so, they'll probably just crack on and get started with it. If it is given the power to do so, it is exactly the sort of body that will simply grow feet and legs. It might even begin to evolve into a functional second chamber. The Assembly can look at all the issues we might be a little hesitant to look at. What sort of currency arrangements do we want? What sort of relationship with the EU do we want? And any vision that the Assembly comes up with will be a vision that the electorate will have a sense of ownership over. We won't have to try to sell them. They'll be buying. I don't think that it is in the least bit unreasonable to suggest that NDRF 2 might hit that 66% mark that Section 8 repeal did in Ireland. Just watch what happens over the next few weeks. The more they realise that we are genuinely going to run a full-scale citizens' assembly, like they did in Ireland, that will empower the sovereign people of Scotland through the ordinary folk that are randomly chosen to represent them, the more desperate and frantic the rhetoric will become. Because the people of Scotland are fed up being told what they think by a government in Westminster that they didn't elect and that is riding roughshod over their clearly expressed will in the Brexit referendum. When push comes to shove, I am convinced that the people of Scotland will weigh up the massive cost of remaining in the UK against the minor inconvenience of choosing independence, and they will choose Scotland.
Thank you, Chris. I have a card in from Craig Lundy to remit the resolution back. I need a seconder from the floor to allow us to hear from Craig. Do I have a seconder? I do. Thank you very much. Craig Lundy, to be followed by Christine Graham as our final speaker.
Thanks for that, because I didn't go and ask MD to do that, so thank you very much. I agree with the spirit. This MD who knows me will know that I agree with the spirit of this resolution, but there are some necessary elements missing. And after Nicola's announcement, I think that it's really important that we do remit this back so that there's a good chance that we come back with a better one for our next conference that addresses these necessary missing elements. Let's start with this one. Participation is not a new idea in terms of democracy. That's what democracy is. Representative democracy is a compromise. Unfortunately, it's one we've become so used to that people's eyes glaze over when you suggest anything different. Liberal democracy across the world, this is a very serious point, is in crisis. It's under attack. And we have to decide what our future democracy is going to be in order to do something about that. And I believe a 21st century social democracy is what is required, although we haven't been doing that for some time either, notwithstanding the best efforts of some of our ministers. The core question that our movement has to ask itself, I believe, is independence for what? And I believe the correct answer to that is independence for change. What kind of change? Well, democratic change. So we need a resolution which embeds citizens in assemblies in a bigger process, not just the gradual democratisation of politics. It's a start, but we need to clarify our trajectory towards the democratisation of our land, of our industry, in the workplace, the democratisation of everything, real democracy. Now, some of our politicians talk about taking us with them. Well, I'm sorry, that's simply not good enough. This has to be the start of a process, unleashing the full potential of everyone. To borrow a phrase from our education system, we have to move on from getting it right for every child to getting it right for every citizen. That's what our future should be about. Now, please vote to remit this resolution back so that we can begin the process of democracy in our party first and across our country. Nothing less than a full commitment to a participative, quite difficult to say that word, democracy, that gives the people of our country the experience and hence the confidence to build a future independent Scotland is required. Please support the remit back.
Thank you, Craig. And finally, to speak for the resolution, Christine Graham MSP.
I'd better keep to my time. I've got my reputation to defend. I think some of my colleagues will be holding pens up, Ms. Freeman. Very much welcome a citizens' assembly. I want to focus on a plea that this assembly engages with our pensioners. In 2014, following analysis by Lord Ashcroft into how the votes had gone, we lost actually on the pensioner vote. I understand why. Because even as people were entering the polling stations in 2014, the unionists were outside saying, vote no or you'll lose your pension. Well, look what's happening to them now with universal credit and everything else. So, while of course you campaign and say, do this for your children, your grandchildren, and your great-grandchildren, I think we should be saying, do it for yourselves as well, because an independent Scotland will care for its elderly population. We do it through the Scottish Parliament with our hands tied behind our back, with free personal care, the concessionary bus pass, which the unionists put scare stories out that we would remove. In fact, we've increased availability of it. These are great things, but we could do so much more if we were in charge of benefits, of pension, and everything else. And that's why I should have declared an interest in a pensioner. But we're a feisty lot, and I can see a lot of feisty pensioners in the hall. We've been at it a long time. That's why the debate in currency was so important about the transition from sterling to whatever we call it, the Scots pound, because people have to feel that their state pension and their occupational pension are safe. That has to be nailed on the head by the Citizens' Assembly. A small move across that generation, and we're over that crossing line to independence. And I've campaigned 50 years for independence, I'm keeping well, mind you, but I campaigned 50 years for independence like many in this hall. And I'll tell you something, I'm going to swear, I bloody well want it in my lifetime.
Thank you, Christine. Delegates, we'll now move to the summing up of the debate. We don't have time to take any further cards, I'm afraid. Can I ask Craig Lundy if you would like to sum up in favour of the remit back? Thank you, Craig.
Yeah, I'll not take up any more of your time. Vote for the remit back and let's have real democracy.
That was very concise, thank you, Craig. And Joanna Cherry to sum up for the resolution.
Right, well, thank you, Christine, for your support. I can't really do better than have your support on this one. And for your comfort, I'll tell you and delegates that in Ireland, one of the issues that the Citizens' Assembly looked at was the challenges and the opportunities of an ageing population. And that's exactly the sort of thing that I'd like to see the Citizens' Assembly deal with. Don't remit this back, colleagues. With all due respect to Craig, I think he's misunderstood what the Citizens' Assemblies are about. This is an idea whose time has come. It's not a replacement for Parliament. It's not a replacement for representative democracy. It's not a replacement for an independence referendum. It's a means of making policy, and it's tried and tested. It's a means of making policy that involves people beyond this hall, people who aren't political activists, everyone in Scotland through a representative cross-sample. It's been tried across the world and it's had huge success. It's been tried on a smaller scale already by the Scottish Parliament for participatory democracy and on a smaller scale in some local authorities in Scotland. We've not had a fully fledged Citizens' Assembly yet, but we're ready to have one. We have the expertise to do it, and it's already been announced as part of the plan leading to IndyRef 2. This is your chance to give it your enthusiastic endorsement and to send a signal out from this conference that the Scottish National Party wants to involve everyone living in Scotland, not just the Scots, everyone living in Scotland.
Thank you, Joanna. So, delegates will now... Point of order. Do you want to come to the podium? Thank you, Craig.
I didn't insult any career politicians up here, so I don't expect to be insulted by career politicians. I have spent my whole... Excuse me a moment, please, let me speak. I have
Craig,
spent my
that
whole
is
life
not a point of
supporting
order.
the idea of citizens' democracies, and I will not be told by someone that I do not understand it. I
Thank
understand
you,
it
Craig.
far better than any career politician. I support that. But I support...
Craig, thank you, Craig. That's not a point of order which must be in relation to the conduct or the procedure of the debate, and I think that we will move on now to the voting in relation to this resolution, delegates. So if I can first ask delegates to vote in relation to the remit back. All those delegates who are in favour of the remit back, if you can please raise your cards. Okay, thank you. Cards down. All those delegates who are against the remit back, if you can raise your cards. Cards down. The remit back falls overwhelmingly. And now moving on to the resolution. If I can ask delegates who are in favour of the resolution to raise your cards. Thank you. Cards down. If I can ask delegates who are against the resolution to raise your cards. Okay, the resolution is passed unanimously. Thank you, conference. Thank you very much, delegates. And I know that you'll now be delighted to join me in welcoming to the podium Jean Freeman MSP. Jean is the MSP for Carrick, Cumnock and Doon Valley and the Cabinet Secretary for Health and Sport. So welcome, Jean.
Conference, thank you very much indeed for the very warm welcome. Conference, what do we value? How we choose to answer that question defines how we try to shape our world. I'll tell you what I value. I value opportunity. I value the opportunity for our young people to attend university based on their ability to learn and not their ability to pay. The opportunity for every newborn in Scotland to receive a baby box, a warm welcome to this country, to the world, and to their home. I value community, a community that prides itself that healthcare is available for all, delivered by a health service publicly owned, publicly operated, and free at the point of need. And I value our diverse communities that call Scotland their home and make our nation richer and stronger for the contribution they make for all of us. I value dignity, the dignity that ensures that everyone who needs it gets free personal care regardless of their age. And 1 year on from the passage of our legislation, and in sharp contrast to the cruelty of Westminster that sits at the pinnacle of a broken system, I value the dignity and respect embedded through our social security system here in Scotland. I value compassion, the compassion shown every single day by the women and men who work in our NHS and in social care, the compassion of neighbours, communities and this country to open our arms and welcome those who are fleeing hunger and war and despair. Opportunity, community, dignity and compassion. That's what I value. And conference, those are the values I want as the hallmark of our nation now and the one we will build with independence. for Scotland to have the opportunity to play our part in the world as a voice for progress and justice, for Scotland to play a full role in the community of European nations, for Scotland's people to have the dignity that the choices we make will be respected, no longer ignored by a shambolic Tory government scrambling for its own survival rather than serving the people. And for Scotland to always show compassion to all who live here and all who struggle and seek a better life here and in countries around the world. These are the positive values that we can fully realise with an independent Scotland. Conference, as we look around the world today, it's clear that we need many, many more positive voices. Tragedy, too heartbreaking for words, seems to plague the news, whether in New Zealand, Sri Lanka, or closer to home on the streets of Derry. It can be all too easy to be bleak, to allow ourselves to feel hopeless. Ours too often is a world where mindless brutes think their hatred is worth more than the lives and the loves of others. Whatever the supposed cause, view, or belief that they claim to advance, all they produce is pain, loss, and suffering. And there are plenty who use these actions as an excuse for rhetoric that demonises people living peacefully, productive lives in their families and in their communities. Conference, I refuse to be bleak. I refuse to accept the fear and hate they want to impose on us. I refuse to accept the division they seek, and I refuse to accept that that is all there is, and there is nothing we can do about it. And I know for certain that we can deny their hate, their division, their abuse by how we conduct ourselves. However frustrating when we face the behaviour of some, we will achieve far, far more when we are respectful, hopeful, and positive. Far, far more than we will ever achieve with abuse. Ours is a positive vision for Scotland, a vision of hope, of opportunity, of possibility, a vision grounded in a track record of achievement, a vision that requires us to lift our words and our actions to meet its promise. Conference, that positive vision is that independence is not an end in itself, it is a means. It is a means by which we protect vital services like the NHS long into the future. As the Health Secretary, I have spent a great deal of my time in recent months working with the First Minister and others to try to prepare as much as we can for the impact of a no-deal Brexit on our NHS. And it is shameful that the Tory government gambles and keeps on gambling with the welfare of patients in Scotland. With independence, Scotland would be represented in its own right with a seat at the negotiating table. You only have to look at the support independent Ireland has had from its European partners to see that. Right now, the UK government is the one that is at the table. And sadly, some vital aspects of health and procurement policy remain in their gift. In June, the UK government will be rolling out the red carpet for the US President Donald Trump. This is a Tory government that is desperate to do a trade deal with the US. But what price will President Trump extract from that feeble UK government? The question is simple. Do you trust Theresa May and Liam Fox to stand up for Scotland's NHS? No, I don't either. And there we see, blindingly exposed, the fundamental difference between independence and devolution. Right now, we are told what powers we can have. With independence, it is the people of Scotland who will choose the powers we share. That's why I want Scotland to be an independent member of the European Union, a sovereign nation working with its equals and partners. One of the huge benefits we realise from the EU is freedom of movement. Freedom of movement that has helped us to attract medical researchers and students from across the continent. Brexit squanders the benefit we get from EU-funded research programmes and seriously threatens the competitiveness of our medical research industry. Freedom of movement also brought women and men from Europe into our health and care services, providing day-in, day-out care in Scotland. They are among those that we've attracted from around the world who are the beating heart of our NHS. So, conference, whether our NHS staff are from Edinburgh, Dublin, Liverpool, Warsaw or Paris, let's tell them now how much we value their work and thank them for their contribution. I know our NHS and care staff face challenges, but I also know that we are determined to tackle them. That's why next week we'll conclude the final stage of our safe staffing legislation, the first comprehensive safe staffing legislation anywhere in the UK, legislation that works for the whole health and care system in Scotland. It's also why this year we're delivering record high health funding, with a health portfolio exceeding £14 billion, supporting a record number of NHS staff, up by over 10% under this SNP government. Our health spending is £185, that's 9% higher per head than in England, equivalent to over £1 billion more spent on health services in Scotland compared to the rest of the UK, and £760 million more than any rhetoric you'll ever hear from the Labour Party. And our patient safety record is amongst the best in the world, with infection from C. difficile and MRSA dramatically reduced for the over 65s by 88% and 94% under our government. And we continue to act swiftly to investigate outbreaks and learn lessons so we keep on improving. There is no room for complacency. Our patient safety programme was the reason that earlier this month, experts from around the world gathered in Glasgow to hear and discuss quality and safety in healthcare. I want to read to you a little bit about what some of them said. Vibeke Richel, who's head of healthcare improvement in Denmark, said, "I've been following Scotland for the last 10 years and have seen major changes and outstanding outcomes that we do not see anywhere else. The world should look to Scotland and learn from your story." She wasn't alone. Dr. Doug Ebe from Alaska, "It was a great privilege to visit Scotland and get the updated story of sustained countrywide effort and excellence." And from south of the border, Dr. James Mountford, Director of Quality at the Royal Free Hospital in London, said, "Scotland's progress over the last 10 years is a model for the world. Patient safety has to be our highest priority above all else. So we push hard for results and we get them. A 36% fall in post-surgical deaths since 2008. More lives saved, more new lives introduced into our country, more lives improved. That's what our health service under the SNP delivers." Conference, since October 2012, over 1.7 million people have had their inpatient treatment within our 12-week target. But there are still too many people waiting too long for the treatment they face. The challenge to meet this demand is faced across the UK. But in England, they look like they are simply abandoning their targets under their Tory government. They give up. We don't. I have no intention of abandoning those who are waiting too long in pain and discomfort for the treatment that they need. So a few months ago, I set out how we will use this significant additional resource to tackle this challenge. A plan that systematically brings improvement to ensure our targets are met by the spring of 2021. Conference, I'm pleased to announce today that this year I will be targeting an additional £70 million of investment to carry out more procedures, hip and knee replacement, cataract procedures, increasing the number of outpatient and diagnostic appointments, and the next steps in delivering our 5 new elective and diagnostic centres across Scotland, bringing quicker treatment for planned surgery and easing the pressure on emergency care. But over all of this, over all that hard work, day in, day out from our staff in health and social care, the threat of Brexit still hangs. Next month, the European Parliament elections will give the people of Scotland a real opportunity to send a clear message. We believe our future lies in Europe. Scotland is for Europe. Our party president, Ian Hutchinson, has been an outstanding servant of Scotland in Europe, and I know in the coming months he'll be doing all he can to return as many SNP MEPs as possible. Our SNP candidates in these elections, led by Alan Smith, are fantastic ambassadors for our party. Alan, Christian, Aileen, Margaret, Heather and Alex will be crisscrossing Scotland to take our message to the people. Our job, your job and mine, is to give our SNP candidates every ounce of our effort and support. Our country needs Scotland's voice to be heard in Europe and heard as loudly as we can make it. So, conference, over the next 25 days, let's take our positive message to the doorstep. Our message of opportunity, of positivity, of hope, our vision for Scotland. Let's make sure that people from elsewhere in Europe who make Scotland their home know we are standing up for them. Let's send SNP MEPs to the European Parliament. Let's win the European election in Scotland and for Scotland. And let's take that next step towards independence. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jean. Delegates, will now move on to resolution number 11, United Nations Special Rapporteur on Extreme Poverty and Human Rights, to be proposed by Alison Thewlis MP and seconded by Julie Hepburn.
Good morning, Conference. I'd first like to begin by thanking Jean for the work that she did in beginning our journey to a fairer social security system with justice at its heart, and to Shirley Ann for continuing that brilliant work, because it's really important stuff for all of our constituents. One of the most disturbing things, fellow delegates, about this brutal, callous Conservative government at Westminster is their outright denial of the facts of their policies and the impact that they have on people. They will dissemble deny, selectively quote, and declare all cases that we raise on behalf of our constituents as some kind of exception to the rule, in spite of what we all know to be true. And what faced the Tories last year was the visit of Professor Philip Alston, the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Extreme Poverty and Human Rights. And Professor Alston travelled, he met with people the length and breadth of the UK, and his findings into the state of the UK was damning. He says in his report, and I would commend everybody to read the report, he says, for almost 1 in every 2 children to be poor in 21st century Britain is not just a disgrace, but a social calamity and an economic disaster all rolled into one. He found, among many things, that the impact of Brexit on people in poverty was an afterthought. On universal credit, which Alston calls universal discredit, he confirms that the 5-week delay, the advance payments, which mean people are borrowing from themselves, and debt repayments are pushing people into serious hardship. He rails against sanctions, calling them draconian, harsh, arbitrary, with devastating effects. He agrees with the UN Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities that those rights are being systematically violated, as this conference has agreed before. He criticises digital by default, which is a policy which means that many people find themselves unable to access the benefits they are entitled to. He says, one wonders why some of the most vulnerable and those with poor digital literacy had to go first in what amounts to a nationwide digital experiment. Conference, I don't wonder at all. The Tories do this because they think they can get away with it. Professor Alston highlights things like benefits reductions and limits like the two-child cap. He challenges the UK government on their mantra of work being the way out of poverty, because conference, maybe it was, but not under the Tories, not under their zero-hour contracts, and not under their pretendy living wage. And conference, who loses out the most? Women, children, people with disabilities, pensioners, asylum seekers and migrants, and those living in rural areas. And we know, conference, don't we, what Labour and the Tories say when the SNP, when we raise these issues. They say mitigate, 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 like a bunch of malfunctioning Daleks. In conference, Professor Alston is absolutely clear in his report. He says mitigation comes at a price and it is unsustainable. It is outrageous that the devolved administrations need to spend resources to shield people from government policies. Conference, Scotland did not elect this Tory government. We did not choose the despicable policies, like making women fill out this form and relive the worst trauma of their life just to put food on the table for a third child. Conference, Professor Alston's report reiterates that poverty is a political choice. He says austerity could easily have spared the poor if the political will had existed to do so. Conference, the Tories do not have that political will. The UK Parliament does not have that political will to do so. Conference, Scotland faces a choice. Do we subject ourselves, our most vulnerable friends and neighbours, to UK government policies which inflict such cruel results? Or do we take these decisions, these choices, and put them in our own hands? We must really realise fully a social security system which is a safety net for all of us, always, when we need it. Conference, we know that we cannot trust Westminster to do this. The UK government have the audacity to deny that there is even a problem. With Independence, Conference, we can take the steps to look after our own people, to bring dignity and respect back. Please support the motion and support Professor Alston in his recommendations.
Thank you, Alison. We now have Julie Hepburn to speak in favour of the resolution, followed by Fiona Sarwar to speak in favour of the resolution. Julie.
During the 2014 independence referendum campaign, like so many people across Scotland, I had so much hope. And with independence finally within our grasp, we could start to build a fairer Scotland to govern in the best interests of all our citizens. But those hopes were, of course, dashed. I turned my despair into increased efforts for the SNP, of course, but it was painfully clear at that point that we would have to wait a bit longer for independence.
And that meant people in my community and people in communities across Scotland having to suffer for longer. So I knew at that point just focusing on politics as a whole, as a vehicle to affect change, wasn't going to be enough for me. So with a fabulous team of local women in my community, I helped to set up a local charity to provide practical support to families struggling with poverty. We run a baby bank, a school uniform bank, and a clothing bank, providing essentials for families who need them. And as an aside, I don't know if she's in the room, a huge shout out to the SNP's own Sandra Douglas, who actually set up the very first uniform bank in Scotland and inspired me to do the same. Our charity is 3 years old now, and we are struggling to keep up with increasing demand, due in no small part to horrendous universal credit. This year, we're on course to support a minimum of around 800 families struggling to make ends meet just in my area. It has been the best and the very worst experience. It's great to be able to help and work with such a phenomenal group of volunteers, but it is utterly soul-destroying too. I cannot tell you how many tears I have shed, and it is just so wrong that so many people are suffering, and I can't even tell you any of the stories because that would just turn on the waterworks. So to see firsthand the scale of the problem, to hear the heartbreaking stories, to witness the despair, to see the stress etched across the faces of those parents, and to know that what you're doing is just a mere drop in the ocean, a sticking plaster. In our community, we as volunteers are mitigating against the worst impact of UK government policies, just as Scotland's government is constantly having to mop up after Westminster's messes. But like you and so many others, I am beyond fed up of picking up the pieces of Westminster's destruction. We need to free ourselves from the cesspit of governance that is the UK political system, to govern ourselves, to have an economy that serves us, the people, not the other way round, and to eradicate poverty in this rich nation of ours. With independence, we can do more than hope for a better future. We can deliver it. Thank you.
Thank you, Julie. And our final speaker in favour of the motion, Councillor Fiona Sarwar.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to Alison and Julie for bringing this important motion to conference. Conference Special Rapporteurs work on behalf of the United Nations within the scope of special procedure mechanisms who have a specific country or thematic mandate from the UN's Human Rights Council. They often conduct fact-finding missions to countries to investigate allegations of human rights violations, countries like Iran, North Korea, Sudan, Somalia. They also conduct thematic investigations, and under this umbrella, the UK has been visited multiple times in the last few years. Following his report on extreme poverty in the UK, Philip Alston wrote, "I have talked with people who depend on food banks and charities for their next meal, who are sleeping on friends' couches because they are homeless and don't have a safe place for their children to sleep, who have sold sex for money or shelter, children who are growing up in poverty, unsure of their future, young people who feel gangs are the only way out of destitution, and people with disabilities who are being told they need to go back to work or lose support against their doctor's orders. I have also seen tremendous resilience, strength and generosity, with neighbours supporting one another, council seeking creative solutions, and charities stepping in to fill holes in government services." Conference, is it of no surprise to us that he found such displays of solidarity amongst citizens. It is in our nature to be good neighbours, but should the weight of this responsibility for such suffering rest on our shoulders alone? Why else do we have the well-oiled and well-paid machinery of Westminster, if not to serve those most in need? The UN Special Rapporteur on Racism, Tendai Ashumi, has also conducted a fact-finding visit to the UK. In her report last year, She raises concerns over the government's immigration law and policy, its anti-terrorism prevent programme, and Brexit-era hate crimes and immigration consequences, and in particular highlights discriminatory practices which are unacceptable and in some cases illegal. In her report, she writes, "I'm shocked by the criminalisation of young people from ethnic minorities, especially young black men. They are overrepresented in police stop and searches, more likely to face prosecution under the country's joint enterprise provisions, and are overrepresented in the prison system." She was alarmed at the stark increases in hate crimes and incidences across the UK during the post-Brexit era. Conference, I'm of the strong opinion that the UK government's increasingly appalling human rights records is one of its greatest shames. It is also just another issue for the UK government to hide under the rug. Conference, we must do all we can to expose this shame and to force the UK government to take action now. I am proud of every effort that the Scottish Government has made to mitigate the devastating policies of austerity, of institutional racism and prejudice. But when Brexit hits, and hit it will, we will be increasingly powerless against these policies. Conference, we deserve better. The UK Government can and should do more, but you and I both know that the only assured way to protect and promote the human rights of the people of Scotland is with independence. I believe that an independent Scotland will be a beacon for human rights both at home and internationally. Let's make the message clear. The best way to protect our human rights is a vote for independence. Thank you.
Thank you, Fiona. Delegates, we had a number of other cards in for people who were keen to speak on this resolution. However, they were all in favour, and we do have a number of other resolutions to discuss this morning. So we'll now move directly to vote on the resolution. Given that all the cards were in favour, can I ask delegates if they are content for the resolution to be approved by acclaim? Thank you, delegates. We'll move now then to resolution number 12 on universal credit split payments, to be proposed by Philippa Whitford MP and seconded by Marion Fellows MP.
Thank you. Can we restart the clock? Have to say, spending half my life in exile in London, that's fair cheered me up. Thank you very much. Now, when I went down to Westminster in 2015, and universal credit, which is a complete and utter burach, gradually became more of a topic, and I looked into it, I was really shocked to discover that it's only paid to a single bank account per household. I was shocked that that ever got through. What are we talking about? The 1950s here. The idea of a breadwinner in the family. Most families have two workers, two earners, just to keep head above water. So why on earth would we say that money can only be paid into one bank account? Now, when I started to raise it almost 2 years ago, the response was always, well, you wouldn't expect an employer to divide salaries. No, I don't. I expect people to earn their own salary. I can tell you, if they tried to pay my NHS salary to my husband, they'd have bloody known about it bloody quickly. Now, obviously, that sounds quite funny and quite bizarre. But as you'll see looking at the resolution, this is talking about women being trapped in relationships of violence and abuse because they don't have the money to leave. But the other thing is that the first step towards that violence and abuse is often control, financial control. Women without a penny in their purse ever. Women who can't just go for a coffee with their colleagues or their friends, who can't go out for a meal with relatives or family who might offer support to escape that. And that then builds up into more and more extreme versions of financial abuse. Now, this isn't just women. Men face both physical and financial abuse as well. But 1 in 5 women will face financial abuse at some point in their lives. Now, that's a shocking figure. But why on earth is a government parcelling up funding and handing it over to what might be the abuser? I find that bizarre and shocking. Now, I've raised it multiple times. And the response is if you're on universal credit, a woman who's being abused could request separate payments. Now, any of you who might be on universal credit or work with people who are, no, it's a joint application. Well, good luck with that. Women's Aid did a survey showing that 85% of abuse survivors would never dare ask for a special arrangement. Every individual requires to have their own money, to have their own empowerment. We heard yesterday about women being trapped by their immigration status. This is trapping women because of their financial status. And despite raising it over and over, the UK government and the Secretary of State are unwilling to do anything about it. Now, I challenge Amber Rudd to deal with this. She said when she took over that she was going to look at DWP policies to see what their impact is on women. Well, Amber, here's one right here. You could look at fixing this. Because this isn't just an issue. This isn't just an issue for women in Scotland. This is women right across the UK. And it should be fixed at source. And I challenge Amber Rudd to actually do that. But I do also challenge the Scottish Government and Shirley Ann. I know and I welcome that they support separate payments for individuals. I know it's difficult. It's actually difficult in theory to work out how you separate them. We are asking Shirley and her team to actually dance a jig with the DWP like an elephant on their back. That's what's holding back our social security policies. But what I'm challenging the Scottish Government is don't give up on this. The DWP are not helping you. I know they're making it difficult, but don't give up on this. Because in the SNP, both the party and the government, we don't just believe in independence for Scotland, we believe in independence for every individual citizen.
Thank you, Philippa. And to second the resolution, Marion Fellows MP.
Good morning, conference, and as they say, follow that. We're quite a feisty bunch as SNP MPs in Westminster, and we stick together like glue. In fact, I shouldn't be standing here. It should be Neil Gray, who's running the London Marathon, running for St Andrew's Hospice, a cause very dear to my heart and to lots of folk in the hall. David Linden, my fellow Deputy Whip, is also running it, and I promise I'll sponsor you as well, David. I've said it out loud here. Oh dear. Right. This is a very important resolution. It is very important, and it is generally women who suffer and who leave abusive relationships. Not only, but the vast majority who leave abusive relationships. And to completely do away with any chance of them getting any support from the state is unjust, unfair, and just downright nasty. But that's what the Tories do. They don't have a DWP, a social justice system that works for the folk that really need it. For them, it's about counting numbers, it's about counting money, and it's about not understanding concepts like the common weal. In Scotland, I can't be the only person that stood stirring a pot and wondering where the money was coming from to pay my next bill. We're all, and quite a lot of us, not all of us, quite a lot of us are 1 month away, or 2 weeks, or a week away from real financial hardship. We need a system that supports our people all the time, all of them, when they need it. This isn't what the UK Tory government system does. As an MP, I have an inbox that is full with people crying out for help, especially after the introduction of universal credit. I don't want to spend conference time going into individual cases, but as another speaker said in the previous debate, it makes you greet. People are in real hardship, people are starving. And when it's a question like split payments, it's not only women and men who suffer. Some of you may have seen me wandering around yesterday with a baby. It's children that are affected by this as well. Amber Rudd, you must do something. You must help. You must change GWP rules. You must help the most needy in our society. Think about dignity and respect. We build it into our social security system in Scotland. Please do the same down south, and be assured SNP MPs will keep you to the mark on everything you do that affects our people. Scotland, vote for independence. Get the social security system that you absolutely need and deserve.
Thank you, Marion. Delegates, there were a number of other cards in from people who were keen to speak in favour of this resolution. However, the clock is against us. So can I ask delegates, given that all of the cards were in favour, are you content to pass this resolution by acclaim? Thank you very much, Conference. So we move now to resolution number 13, a Scottish Statistics Agency. And the resolution is to be proposed by Ronnie Cowan, MP, and seconded by Stuart McMillan, MSP.
Afternoon, Conference. I'm delighted to move this resolution for a Scottish Statistics Agency. The establishment of an SSA is another logical step in the establishment of an independent country. When we are independent, and indeed as we move towards that day, we need accurate, timely, non-partisan data. Official statistics that can guide evidence-based policy. Official statistics that can help commercial and charitable organisations. Official statistics that are a common good. They can enable Scotland's people to understand not just their nation's economy, but their lives by showing the nature of policies and their impact. As an SSA, we would charge them with producing data that's not just relevant nationally, but also pertinent to the wide range of urban and rural communities that Scotland contains. The UK relies heavily on the ONS, the Office of National Statistics. They rely on them for a large part of the government statistics, regulated by the UK Standards Authority. Often statistics are gathered by means of representative samples. For a randomly sampled poll of 1,000 people, this should mean that 95% of surveys should give a result very close to the answer that the whole population would give if asked. Teasing out or disaggregating a Scottish view from a UK samples can be difficult. In a UK sample of 1,000 people, we would expect only 83 Scottish people to have been surveyed. A UK sample of 10,000 people would mean 830 Scottish people. Broken down to local authority level, the sample size can be so small as to make drawing firm conclusions difficult. For instance, the ONS, Official Labour Market Statistics for NOMS, provides the annual number of workless households at local authority level, but the sample size is too small to reliably identify the number of children living in those households. Inverclyde, my constituency, has 5,600 workless households, but no data is available on the number of children living in them. So while the numbers at Scotland level may be sufficient to indicate that the Scottish Government focus on tackling child poverty is clearly justified, the local numbers needed to plan interventions and monitor impact need to be found from elsewhere. The UK-level data may also not reflect the different priorities and interests in Scotland. Agility is about how quickly data collection shifts in response to changing needs. We know that work does not provide a guaranteed way out of poverty. 2/3 of children growing up in poverty live in a family where one parent works. This suggests new metrics are needed to capture the prevalence of poverty and identify who is poor. The efforts of the Scottish Government to tackle poverty in Scotland caused by the Tory welfare reforms, example mitigating the bedroom tax, is a stark example of how there are likely to be significant differences in the priorities between the Scottish and UK governments in terms of what data we're interested in gathering. Ensuring statistical integrity, making personal data secure, developing a culture within which civil service statisticians work free of inappropriate influence are important issues for all governments in building public confidence in its official statistics. Greater independence and statistical capacity is also connected to another issue, harnessing and the integrity of data of other non-governmental collectors such as enterprise organisations, universities, think tanks and third sector organisations, not only in relation to the economy but in other major policy areas. To avoid duplication or confusion, a framework would be needed which could be agreed on how such collaboration would work. This would be for those involved in the feasibility study to consider, and we hope for as wide as possible a range of input to that. There is no shortage of ideas and choices. The SSA may take the form of a single centralised agency in which it is charged with collecting or commissioning data, the vast majority of statistical data. Alternatively, it may be more of an overseer of a decentralised network of specialised data providers, a regulator to ensure the data meets a sufficiently stringent code of practice, as well as maintaining a data portal to ensure access to the gathered data. So maybe, to sum up, the development of an SSA is another area in which citizens' assemblies could be extremely worthwhile.
Thank you, Ronnie. To second the resolution, Stuart McMillan, MSP, to be followed by Christopher Duffy to move the remit back.
Good afternoon, conference. You're a hardy bunch, a statistics debate on a Sunday lunchtime. Thanks for staying back for it. Generally, conference, I do want you to back this resolution by acclaim today. And one of the comments from Julie Hepburn earlier on, I thought was just, I thought it kind of put the nub on the issue that Scotland actually faces and this issue of independence and moving our nation forward. Julie said earlier on that the Westminster is a cesspit of Westminster governance. Now, how often have we been told in Scotland that Scotland is too wee, too stupid and too poor to actually become an independent country? This is where this type of agency will be so important to actually get that message over to the wider population that actually Scotland isn't too wee, too stupid and too poor to become that independent country that we actually want it to become. Now, we know that the Westminster system is broken, and this Westminster political system is broken, and I'm actually quite happy that for Scotland to help that Westminster improve itself, but only after we are an independent nation and we are moving our country forward. I'm happy to help Westminster, to help the people of England and Wales and Northern Ireland to actually become a better group of nations as compared to the situation that they currently face, as do we under this current, unfortunately, terrible Westminster system. Now, I would argue with yourselves that when we become independent, and the situation we have now, we've got a potential referendum coming within the next 2 years. We have to have that mindset of a nation and a movement that of Scotland already being that independent country. So we have to consider, what do we need to become that independent country? And this agency is actually one of those things that we actually require. We also require, as we know, to have the full remit of social security powers, immigration powers, and I've touched upon earlier on regarding freedom of movement as to how important that actually is for Scotland's economy. And also the financial powers, to name just three. Now, day after day, week after week, the Scottish Government are actually getting on with that day job. Despite what the unionists tell you, they are getting on with that day job, but it is also with one arm tied behind its back. They are showing the aspiration, and they're also showing the issue of a better Scotland, but also that issue of hope. But without actually having full range of powers, and also having all the data to hand, then there is a gap. Now, I previously worked in the IT industry, so I know how important data actually is for the decision makers, and how accurate that information needs to be for the correct decisions to be taken. So, conference, to conclude, I do want you to think of this not solely as an agency, but also as part of the infrastructure of independence. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Stuart. To move the remit back, delegates, we have Christopher Duffy, followed by Declan Blench to second the remit back. Both are first-time speakers, and if we can stick very closely to time, that would be helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Conference. When I joined this party all those years ago, I never thought I would be speaking at Conference necessarily against the transfer of a role or power from Westminster to Scotland, so I really don't do this lightly. Firstly, let me be clear, I am not opposed wholly to the principle of this motion. I think going forward, to become an independent country, we do need more data, and a full statistics agency is something that an independent Scotland needs. However, when I first saw this motion, it was Disraeli that came to mind: lies, damned lies, and statistics. As someone who's had the misfortune of having to study a lot of statistics as part of my degree, I understand their power. They let us quantify the world around us, and they tell us what is going on. Unfortunately, they're also open to misuse and misinterpretation. I don't want to speak to the motivation of those who brought this motion. I'm sure it is perfectly well-intentioned, and their speeches that they have just given really do give them credit. However, I get a sense that some of this motion came from a dissatisfaction with some of the statistics that we see. I think one of the most obvious examples of this is the Government Expenditure and Revenue Report of Scotland. It is an inexact measure of the fiscal situation of Scotland, but it is one born of the necessity of devolution. We must apportion national spending. And this is always going to be contentious, especially when we disagree with some of the political decisions made in that spending, perhaps most notably military spending. However, Conference, GERS is, for better or for worse, fit for purpose. Don't just take my word for it. A lot of the Scottish Government's own estimates on fiscal spending are based upon those figures. So if it's good enough for them, I think, delegates, it should be good enough for us. In creating our own statistics agency, we would be replicating much of the work that is done on a UK level. And some of the results of this are going to be different. And I sincerely fear, delegates, that if we did that, we would have one statistic that said one thing, and the UK government would have another statistic that said one thing. And we are going to find ourselves, this is going so well, and we're going to find ourselves in a situation where those on one side of an argument will use one statistic and those on another will use another. And in a growing era of fake news, this is something that we've got to work against. We cannot muddy the water. Conference, in speech after speech, people use statistics here. We hear about the great work of this Scottish Government reducing crime and so on. I think when we see a bad statistic, instead of trying to replace it with a different model, we need to focus on making improvements in those areas. I sense I've not won you, but thank you anyway, and please support the remit back.
Thank you, Christopher. Our final speaker for Resolution 13 is Declan Blench to speak to the remit back.
And what a room to be speaking to about this. And my notes are upside down, brilliant. I would echo a lot of what Chris says and his concerns with the motion as it's written just now. I also worry, though, that it leaves us open to, and you can imagine the headlines that we're going to be getting from this. It's going to be leaving us open to accusations of creating our own statistics and our own facts, which is just going to play so badly against us, I think, in the referendum that's ahead. It's a very big gamble. The motion also says that it wants the Scottish Government to have the data necessary to make informed policy decisions. We already have a lot of that data, and the evidence of that we just heard from Jean Freeman not long ago. We were making excellent policy decisions already, and we should be able to continue doing that using the same data sets we've been using for the last 12 years in government. Thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca. Delegates, we are moving towards the close of the morning session, so the time is marching on. I wonder if the movers of the remit back and resolution would be content to waive their rights to sum up. Thumbs up from one. Ronnie would like to sum up for the resolution. Ronnie Cowan.
Just a quote came to my mind there. I sit in a committee at Westminster, the Public Administration and Constitutional Affairs Select Committee, not the sexiest name in the world, but we take evidence from the UKSA and the ONS. And I spoke to an eminent statistician down there, easier done than said, and I gave them the lies, damn lies and statistics, and they laughed at me and said, I'll tell you this, good statistics put a lie to damn lies. It's as simple as that. And we're not talking just about public policy here, we're talking about the retail price index. How do we get, who knows what the RPI actually is? Or should we be using the CPI? And we don't know right now, because one of them's tied to retail, one of them's tied to consumer prices, and they're different things. That accurate information determines your pension schemes. So if we get RPI wrong, your pension's whacked. It's as simple as that. So we need accurate information, not just for government, it's not just about policy, it's about how organisations, charities, businesses can accurately say that is a non-partisan, non-political figure which I can hang my hat on. This is not all about politics.
Thank you, Ronnie. So, delegates will now move to voting on Resolution 13. We will first vote on the remit back. So if I can ask all delegates who are in favour of the remit back to please raise your cards now. Thank you. Cards down. All delegates who are against the remit back, please raise your cards now. Thank you. Cards down. The remit back falls substantially. And if we can now move to voting on the resolution, all delegates who are in favour of the resolution, please raise your cards now. Thank you. Cards down. All delegates who are against the resolution, please raise your cards now. The resolution is passed overwhelmingly. Thank you, delegates. Delegates, we have an excellent way to conclude our morning session today. We are going to be hearing from our Westminster Group Leader, Ian Blackford. Ian is very popular, obviously. Ian is the MP for Rossguy and Lochaber. And Ian, welcome to the podium.
Well, thank you, Convener. Good morning, Conference. It is fantastic to be here at home with you in our vibrant capital city. And I can go back to when I first joined this party in this very city 40 years ago. And I grew up in the same constituency as John Swinney and Peter Murrow, our Chief Executive. And Peter and I were growing up in West Edinburgh. We were Hibs fans together. And, you know, I'm delighted that Peter, in putting together the agenda, has given me the opportunity to speak this afternoon. But Peter, why did you have to do it when Hibs were kicking off against Hearts at Easter Road this afternoon? But for those that were at the conference karaoke last night, we did have the opportunity to have an outstanding rendition of Sunshine on Leith. Friends, it's a pleasure to be here, but make no mistake, these are no ordinary times, and this is no ordinary conference. We are here to make history. We are here to begin the campaign to make Scotland an independent, prosperous country in the European Union. You know, politics in Scotland and London is consumed by Tory Brexit. Parties in Westminster are distracted and divided by infighting between the Remainers and the Brexiteers. But not us, not the Scottish National Party. We are united, we are focused, we are determined. We know that Scotland deserves better than the shambles of Westminster. Britain is broken, and Scotland is ignored by Westminster. Friends, this cannot go on. Our message here today must be simple. It must be about what we know is the truth, that the future of our nation will only be enhanced when we break free of the dangerous, nasty, and failing politics of Westminster. You know, for 3 years now, the Tory party and the Labour Party have focused on themselves, battling internally on the issue of Brexit and with no focus on delivering for the people of Scotland. We now have a UK government that has effectively ceased to function with the UK poised over a cliff edge that will destroy jobs and make people poorer. Conference, Theresa May be in office, but she certainly is not in power. But, friends, what is worse is within months we could be facing Boris Johnson becoming Prime Minister. What a real nightmare scenario for the people of Scotland. You know, Brexit has, well, you know, I can hear people shouting help, but I'll tell you what the help is. The help is delivering Scottish independence. You know, I hope that wasn't Roger Mullen that shouted that, because it reminds me when we were all elected to Parliament in 2015, and the first time I was heckled wasn't by a Tory, it was by Roger. But Brexit has been forced on us by lawbreakers who don't give a damn about ordinary working people in Scotland. They have to be stopped. We cannot and we will not allow Scotland to follow Theresa May or Boris Johnson off the cliff edge. The Tories have ignored the will of the Scottish people. They have ignored the decisions of our sovereign Scottish Parliament. And time again, they've blatantly ignored the efforts for compromise which have come from our Scottish government. We need to remind the Tories that they've lost every single general election in Scotland since the 1950s. The Tories are out of touch with Scotland. And friends, the Prime Minister has no mandate in Scotland. On Tuesday, the 12th of March this year, the Scottish Parliament and Welsh Assembly, working together, voted on a historic joint motion rejecting the Prime Minister's deal and rejecting no deal. And let me remind Theresa May, and those Scottish Tories propping her up on her benches, on June 2016, an overwhelming majority, 62% of Scots that voted to remain. Scotland's voice must be heard and must be respected. Scotland will not be dragged out of the European Union against our will. It will be the right of the people of Scotland to determine our future, not the Prime Minister. You know, the Tories and Labour need to wake up to reality. They face terminal decline in Scotland if they continue to ignore our wishes and our interests. The YouGov poll for the Times yesterday should be a reality check. The SNP has secured a massive 23-point lead at Westminster, with the Tories and Labour falling way behind. You know, I say to them, bring on a general election, because the SNP will be back in increased numbers at Westminster, standing up for Scotland. Brexit has created the context of change, significant change, where the choice before us is between Brexit and Scotland as an independent European nation. It is for us to decide our future. A Scotland locked indefinitely into Brexit Britain, or a Scotland free to decide its own future. Conference, we have a choice to make. Enough is enough. The choice is no longer about how to mitigate Brexit, and it's about how to stop it and how Scotland gets out of it. The lifeline thrown to Westminster by the European Union to stop a no deal has been critical to protect our economy and our interests, but the clock is still ticking. Our position is clear. SNP MPs will fight to stop Brexit. Scotland has been completely ignored throughout the Brexit process. Westminster is dragging us down the path to economic disaster. The people of Scotland deserve the choice of a better future than Brexit Britain. A choice of Scotland, a destination in Europe, or being sidelined within an inward-looking United Kingdom. Let's be clear, continued Westminster rule is the biggest threat to Scotland's economy and to long-term prosperity, the biggest threat to jobs, to incomes and to living standards, the biggest threat to our NHS, our public services, our society. Scotland did not vote to leave the EU, and we will not be dragged out against our will. So I can confirm today that the SNP will never vote for the withdrawal agreement bill when it comes before us in Westminster. We will not ever support this damaging blindfold Brexit deal. Theresa May has failed to protect our economy, our communities, and all of our futures. The Prime Minister is frozen in a failure of her own making, hamstrung by her extreme right-wing Brexiteers in her own party. Theresa May, your time is up. Conference, I call upon Jeremy Corbyn to join with us in the SNP and rule out any support for the withdrawal bill, which would lead Scotland and the rest of the UK into economic chaos. The coalition of the opposition now needs to come together and do what the people elected us to do: oppose this Tory government. Conference, the Tories don't care what happens to the economy or to our citizens' livelihoods. Their obsession with leaving Europe is driven by an ideological desire to return to the days of the Empire. Well, I hope the Tories are listening, because these days are over. And while they dream of a mythical past, citizens today are struggling to make ends meet, forced to queue at food banks to feed their children. Immigrants have the door closed in their face, while women who have been the victims of rape are forced to prove their child is a victim of such a horrific crime in order to access universal credit. What a disgrace, Conference. The UK government has created a cruel and callous system that punishes people instead of helping them prosper. We will not be dragged down into the gutter with them. Our ambition for our people is to grow a fairer, inclusive, welcoming and prosperous country, filled to the brim with talent and opportunity. Friends, that is our vision for our nation. But Brexit threatens all of that. It threatens to make our economy smaller, our people poorer, and our country weaker. That's why we need to send a clear message that we will not accept a Brexit process that silences Scotland, treats our Parliament and government with contempt, and fails to represent the interests of the people of Scotland. That's why we need to take the opportunity of the European elections to prove that Scotland wants something different from all this chaos, a seat and a voice at Europe's top table. Friends, these elections are Scotland's opportunity to be heard, an opportunity to show to ourselves and the wider world that Scotland wants something better. We want to be a decision maker, working constructively on an equal basis with our friends throughout Europe. Voters can send a message that Scotland will no longer be silenced. It is important that we thank our friend Ian Hudson for his outstanding service for our movement. And today I pledge that the Westminster Group will be getting out on the streets over the coming weeks so that we deliver the biggest ever number of SNP parliamentarians sent to Brussels. Conference, over the last few months in Westminster, the SNP has worked very hard to build a consensus to stop Brexit. With our sister party Plaid Cymru, with the Greens and with the Liberal Democrats, we have tried to force the case to put the decision back to the people. A second referendum would give citizens across the UK the option to take back control. But let's face facts. Nigel Farage and his cronies lied to the people. They put £350 million on the side of a bus for the NHS, yet it never materialised. The Leave campaign was characterised by scaremongering and lies. And yet, while we in the SNP have successfully gained cross-party support to force the need for a second referendum into the heart of Parliament, Jeremy Corbyn has failed to show any courage, any leadership. The truth is this. It is the Scottish National Party that is the real opposition to the Conservatives in Westminster. You know, Jeremy Corbyn can't even control his own party, never mind taking on the Tories. Hamstrung like the Prime Minister, Jeremy Corbyn has cowardly failed to fight in the corner of the people who want a final say. Jeremy, if you are watching, do us all a favour. Get off the fence. Do the right thing. If Labour's talks with the Prime Minister are to have any purpose, then Jeremy Corbyn must press for a second EU referendum in the cross-party talks. Failure to do so will be an act of supreme cowardice. Conference, meanwhile, your SNP MPs, Scotland's SNP MPs, are getting on with the day job. The Westminster Group proudly championed the £3 million campaign for scrapping the £65 registration fee charged to EU nationals, a policy the UK government got rid of thanks to SNP pressure. Ronnie Cowan's tireless work on fixed odds betting terminals was finally met by the UK government, who conceded and are reducing stakes from this month. Deirdre Brock, who has been a consistent champion for Scottish farmers and fishermen. Deirdre successfully exposed the fact that the Prime Minister's Brexit deal would repeat history and sell out the Scottish fishing industry. Stuart C. MacDonald has led the way in opposing the hostile environment embodied by the Tory government's immigration bill. He has been a powerful voice in advocating the truth that freedom of movement is good for Scotland. My deputy, Kirsty Blackman and Alison Thulis, are taking on those who seek to duck tax and cripple our economy. They truly have been outstanding in carving the way for a fairer society and an economy that works for all. SNP MP Stephen Gessens, Joanna Cherry and Peter Grant have taken on the Tories at every turn as they seek to inflict the worst possible hardship in Scotland through Brexit. They have been a formidable team, stopping at nothing to defend the rights of the people of Scotland. And delegates, we all know one of the most precious times in our lives is the arrival of a new baby. And we should all be so proud of the work from our friend and colleague, David Linden, on paternity rights reform, so that in any time of need, that UK law does not stop fathers being there with their families when they need it. Thank you, David. Conference, I could go on. Your team of SNP MPs have been consistent, determined and courageous. While MPs in the Tory and the Labour Party are fighting internal battles, the SNP MP team is only focused on one thing: fighting for you, standing up for Scotland. But now, the biggest fight is to come, and we are up for it. The Brexit experience has exposed the clear weakness in the current devolution settlement. What was long in the decay is now broken. Brexit has created the context of change, significant change, where the choice before us is between Brexit and Scotland as an independent European nation. It is up for all of us, it is up for the people of Scotland to decide their future. A Scotland locked indefinitely into Brexit Britain, or a Scotland free to decide its own future. As our First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, set out, the decision on Scotland's future must be available within the lifetime of this Parliament, in line with our mandate won in the 2016 election. Scotland must, Scotland will have that right to decide, and Westminster must respect the sovereignty of the people of Scotland. Now is the time for us, for our movement, to prepare the path to independence, to persuade the people of Scotland of our vision. Nicola has done an incredible job of keeping us on a steady ship. While Westminster is out of control, in Scotland, the SNP is firmly in control, getting on with the day job, delivering more and more for our citizens as each day passes. Friends, we live in a country that we can be proud of. We have a government that we have pride in. A record for standing up for Scotland. Our ethos of sustaining access to further and higher education based on ability, not based on an ability to pay. And that includes EU students starting courses in 2020. A record of world-leading climate change legislation, and yes, we will go further. A proud record of delivering transformation on LGBTI rights. Conference, Scotland is leading on the global stage on so many issues, but we are still constrained by the limitations of devolutions. We have, though, come far in the last 20 years since devolution. Now is the time. Let us finish that journey. We have the courage, the belief, and the dedication to turn the tide for Scotland. We have led the journey, and our destination is now in sight. Our First Minister has set the course. We now must put all shoulders to the wheel, to stand up for Scotland, to build a better Scotland, and to do that together. The time is coming. Let's get ready. Let's do this.